Peer observation questions. How heavily are peer observations weighted in our ASA applications or evaluations? I assume also this refers to cumulatives and range elevation. So, Senate Policy F12-6 says, quote, effectiveness in teaching is the primary consideration in evaluating most faculty members' performance. When evaluating effectiveness in teaching, chairs, committees, and administrators are required to conduct a holistic evaluation. This means that teaching must be considered in context and must be evaluated using multiple sources of information. See also Senate Policy S15-8, S21-2, S15-8 Amendment H, Article 15 of the CBA, and the English Department bylaws. Probably there are college bylaws as well. Good times, right? What this means is that there are lots of different documents and policies that are shaping what happens in evaluation. All of the decisions that the department makes in the RTP committee are designed to evaluate comprehensively and holistically what your teaching materials are. So that means that your teaching observations, your SOTs, feedback from students, evidence of development over the course of time, all of those are weighed together. No one individual thing is determinative of what the committee evaluates. We are also weighing over time, right? So if you have gotten teaching observations that are good consistently and then one turns out to be terrible, that doesn't mean we're using that as the way to evaluate you in total. If you have lots of bad ones but they're constantly on the upswing, then what we're looking at is trends over time. Largely what we're interested in is aggregate performance. When we're not interested in aggregate performance, it's usually because of evidence of intentional bad faith or dangerous behavior or something like that, right? So if if you light a fire in the classroom just for funsies, then we might weigh that more heavily than the trend over time of your teaching observations. But what we're looking at in your observations is trends over time. What are the things that you're getting feedback on? How are you working to address things that you're getting feedback on? What are the ways that you're demonstrating growth, success, et cetera, in the classroom? While you're waiting for the microphone to come around, I'll say one other part. The number of teaching observations that are required by policy is the minimum number that have to be evaluative. So all of the ones that you get that are assigned by the associate chair have an evaluative component, all of them. The only time, they're also supposed to be formative, right? So we're supposed to be giving you feedback on how you grow and develop as a teacher. You can ask for additional formative evaluations that are not evaluative, but they also then cannot be used in an evaluative fashion in your annual evaluations. Does that make sense? Okay. Sarah, questions?
In what you were just talking about in aggregate, looking at whatever the RTP committee is, deciding or whatever's, the documentation that you are looking at is the peer observation, SOTs, and annual summary of achievements. Is that correct? So when you guys are evaluating, are you you see what I'm saying? What documents are you actually looking at? I just want to clarify.
So at the minimum, we are looking at your SOTs, your teaching observations, and your narrative of growth. But you have lots of opportunities and options to add additional information to help qualify what we see. All of the materials that we see are in eFaculty. So if you did an amazing job of teaching 27 sections and, angels came down from on high and you don't put it in there, I don't see it. I don't evaluate it. I don't judge it. I don't use it to judge you. So
it is up to us to create other documents and upload them into eFaculty to persuade committees if we feel like we want to do that.
correct. Yep. The required materials as defined in the process is the minimum amount of expectation.
I think I just, really quick, the reason I wanted to clarify that is because it's one of those things where you're like, oh, well, these are required, right? We have to make sure that we do all these things and want to make sure that we're doing, and sometimes I think because of that focus, I personally have lost sight of oh, well, why the hell were we even doing this? What, if I want them to see this, then I need to make them see it. Right? Because you're just so focused on what's required, you don't think about other things that you could add additionally.
The idea of having them as often as we do is that they're interconnected, right? So if you do an ASA every year and sort of build year to year on the things, then by the time you hit a cumulative after 3 years, you have begun to establish a long-term narrative. And by the time you come up for a range elevation, you now have a significantly longer amount of narrative that you can draw on in order to be able to track your development as a teacher over time. I realize, as well as you do, that sometimes it just ends up being another thing on the list, and that you have to get it off your list before you can move on to the next huge list of other things you have to do. So I know that it functions often as a sort of checkbox, get it out of the way, do the minimum, but it's designed and intended, and not by us, by the university, right? We didn't design it. It's designed and intended to be something that helps you as a professional track over time the things that you're doing in relation to the requirements and expectations.
I have a question about the ASA form because it has 3 different areas, right? Contributions to service and advising and whatnot. A lot of those do not apply to lectures necessarily because as adjunct faculty, we're not expected to serve on committees or do any kind of service or extra engagement other than teaching. However, if people do want range elevation, and I don't know to which extent extra service and contributions to university level or college or program level, department level, are taken into consideration, and are they expected to some degree that people will contribute, and if, and to which extent these need to be showcased and written out, and does it help if you have proof, let's say, if you have a letter, like a thank you letter or whatever for volunteering here or being on an advisory board there, especially if they have something that they send out, is it something that you need to attach, or it's enough to describe briefly on ASA and that kind of stuff?
Yes, so that's actually one of my questions, but I'll answer it now. Your job, so I'm going to talk sort of in general, because there are often ways in which different lecturers have different job expectations and responsibilities, right? So at a sort of general level, most of the lecturers in our department are hired as teachers, and the vast majority, if not the totality of their responsibilities is as teachers. The options to add service or RISCA are there as a way for you to demonstrate additional engagement with professional development and growth over time. It is not totally unlike what we ask our students to do in our writing classes. What evidence do you have that is useful to support the case that you have grown in the set of expectations you've been asked to demonstrate? If you chose, if your entire job letter tells you that your responsibility is teaching, and you chose to do 0 service and 0 RISCA, fine, that's okay. If you're asked to do entirely teaching and you do a series of service and RISCA activities that are related to your teaching and will help you demonstrate growth over time, great. We'd love for you to be able to help us as readers see that. So the expectation that you'll do those things is nothing. The opportunity for you to use those things in support of your case about who you are as a teacher and your professional growth, it's there for you. To the second part about whether or not you should upload thank you letters and things like that, it's sort of like, how helpful and useful do you think they will be in helping you make the larger case? So they often say when you have these meetings at the university level, they're like, well, you really wanted to say something specific and demonstrate your, okay, if you have that, great, we'd love to see it. Is it going to be a strike against you if it's a very general letter of thanks? No. Could it help if you just upload it? Sure. But really what we're trying to evaluate is your growth and development in your academic assignment. So that'll change, like for some, not really so much in our department, but in other departments, other colleges, some of their lectures have like service responsibility or requirements. So their academic assignment would include that. In others, they may have RISCA reassigned time or something like that. So that would be part of what their what their academic assignment is. So it really depends on your assignment. More questions? Okay, I'll keep going. Should we plan peer observation early, mid, or late semester? It really depends on you. There isn't a particular benefit to being observed at one time in the semester other than what is comfortable for you and your colleagues and your observers. So it doesn't particularly matter. I think one of the things to keep in mind is that early in the semester, you guys are often, as teachers, we're all sort of building rapport with students. And so it can be nice to move it later in the semester so that you have rapport with students before you're inviting a stranger in to come and watch you teach. On the other hand, you may find that early in the semester, you have a better sense of what kinds of feedback you might request from an observer. So it might be useful to have somebody come early who can help you identify places that you can strengthen your teaching at the beginning of the semester rather than waiting till the end of it. So kind of depends on your needs. Do observers have a deadline for when they need to give us a copy of their observation write-up? Contractually, they have to give you the write-up within 15 days of completing their observation. That includes the observing of the evaluation of your written feedback on student papers. So what that means in practice is that it often is somewhat later than when they actually come to your class, but by contract, they have to give it to you within 15 business days of completing the observation. Can literature professors observe composition instructors? Yes. We make every effort not to assign people to observe classes that they don't teach. But given the size of our department and the number of observations that we have every year, it's not always feasible. So, yes. How are peer observers trained? I suppose what I'm getting at is what is done to norm them so that observers are applying the same standards to all lecturers to ensure fairness. There is no formal training. The people who have been doing observations for many years have often been the beneficiaries of ad hoc training, but there's nothing systematic, and there has never been anything systematic. You can request peer observation training from the Center for Faculty Development. I don't know anybody who's ever done that, but you could theoretically request that. But for people teaching in the program, there is no formal systematic training at all. This does not set us out of the norms for universities around the country, right? This is sort of traditionally, there has been no training. The assumption being that if you have risen to a certain level in the academic hierarchy, you are better able to assess the people who are doing work lower than you on the academic hierarchy. Within the last few years, maybe even decades, people are starting to come around to the realization that's maybe not the best way to do these things. But there remains nothing formal in policy. Amanda and I have started conversations about a sort of training for peer observations in the first year writing program, but they're at the very beginning of planning stages. So hopefully sometime in the not too distant future, we will have opportunities for that. How long or detailed is the observation report expected to be? Is it supposed to be an objective record that shows what teaching approaches were used? Is the evaluator required to include specific suggestions for improvement? Are these supposed to be suggestions to offer a possible alternative from a peer's own practice and style? Or are they suggesting improvement to something that's not working? To what extent do these suggestions influence peer evaluation and the overall evaluation? Rachel, I told you, you might be disappointed to learn that I will answer all the questions and sub-questions. I didn't say you did it. I said you're going to get the full response. There's no minimum or maximum length on these things. The form is supposed to record the class session and provide an overall assessment of what is working well and what is not working well, as it could, not working as well as it could be in relation to the guidelines as spelled out on the observation form and based on reviewers' experience and expertise. In keeping with the program and department values, observations are intended to be formative, noting places where the observer thinks things are going well and places where they think they can help the teacher do a better job. However, as I said before, if it's a required observation, it is also by definition evaluative. So your observer is making an evaluative comment on whether or not they think you're doing a good job or not. We have talked in years past and may continue to talk in years moving forward about whether or not we're going to leave the evaluative comments at the bottom, you know, where you circle they're excellent or commendable or whatever they are. But even if we take those away, and we might, nonetheless, the observations are evaluative and will be read by the committees as such. The RTP committee reads the forms carefully, and what we're looking for is certainly the final evaluation, but we're also looking for, if somebody writes in their observation, this was a mess, oh my God, the students left screaming, it was terrible, commendable. The judgment of the committee may be to exercise discretion to evaluate it differently than the commendable rating at the bottom, if that makes sense. Sure.
Given the differences in teaching styles, expertise, background knowledge between people who teach certain types of courses or not, and to which extent, I guess, the expertise and evaluation of the observer is being trusted when they provide suggestions for improvement or what's something that they're noticing that could be done differently. A lot of times, perhaps the intention of how things are used may be not coinciding between the observer and observee, and it might be not necessarily that the observed person is not doing something pedagogically incorrect or inappropriate, but maybe there are constraints of time, or they intend to use this material in such way, and then the observer thinks that it should be used in a different way, like those kinds of nuances and things that kind of come up. And RTP committee, do they see it as, they trust the observer, or do they really sort of look at the way the lesson went, and having read the comments, they can still sort of see that, to which extent the suggestions might be coming more based on the particular teaching style bias versus what actually went on.
I gotcha. As I said before, the way that the RTP committee reads your dossier is holistically. So if you've got an observer who misunderstood your class for whatever reason, right? Maybe they were having a bad day, maybe they don't know what they're talking about. Both of those are possible, right? What we are as an RTP committee trying to understand is, if we take all the evidence together, what are the ways that we can notice or comment on and point to room for growth for you as a teacher, and whatever the evaluative necessity is. So if you've got SOTs and student comments that are great, and you've got evidence that you've been doing professional development, and you've got other sorts of evidence that you are growing as a teacher, and your narrative describes the way that you've used these things, and then you've got a not so good observation, that's one thing in this panoply of evidence that we have. If what you've got is an observation that says this is not working, and you've got SOTs that say this is not working, and you've got a narrative that ignores all the other things that say it's not working, then it's easier for us as a committee to say, seems like something's happening here. We are constrained by the evidence that we have in front of us, so we put a certain amount of evaluative trust in what the observers are saying, given the conditions of the system. So that said, you also have, so the way that the observation system is supposed to work is you're supposed to have a meeting in advance where you discuss what is happening in the class and give your observer expectations for what they should imagine. In the context of doing that, you might say, I'm having trouble with this, and so I'm having you come on this day so that you can see all these things and give me feedback on them. Or, I think I'm really good at this, and I would like you to see me succeeding at these things, right? So you're supposed to have that meeting in advance. You're supposed to then have them come to your class. Then they write the report. Then you have another meeting where you discuss what the report is. After they file their report, you've signed it, they've signed it, they submit it. You have a certain amount of time, I think it's 10 days or 5 days, I'm not sure what it is, to write a response. So if somebody comes to your class, you've had all these discussions, you say, this is what I'm doing, this is what I think I'd like you to see, this is how I want feedback. They come in, they've misunderstood everything, and they've written you a terrible observation, or even a good observation for that matter. You're well within your rights and encouraged to write back and say, that's not how this was supposed to go, or this went exactly how I intended it and I think they misunderstood it, or my pedagogical vision is different from what they're talking about. And so they're upset because I didn't do these things. I didn't do those things on purpose because what I was trying to do is this. So there are a whole series of sort of like overlapping opportunities for you to say, this is important in these ways, it matches up to what I needed in these ways, it didn't quite hit what we were working on in these ways. And if you forego those opportunities, then we have only what the evidence is in the dossiers. Does that make sense? So I would say don't leave the last word to the observer. But do we take them seriously, and do we invest a fair bit of trust in them? Yeah, we do.
I'm sorry, I have a follow-up question.
Use the microphone.
So this is kind of like a flip side. So if the observation is has a elaborate report, and the observer actually thinks that things are working out in every area, and they don't seem to know what kind of suggestions could be used or provided, to which extent there is expectations that observers have to provide suggestions no matter how well things are working out, right?
I think what I'm hearing in your question is, are observers required to find something wrong with you?
Right.
And I think the answer to your question is, by policy, no. We're not required to find, observers are not required to find something wrong with you. But we're a bunch of English teachers. We're a bunch of English teachers in academia. We're gonna find something wrong. We always find something wrong. That's what our training is in, is finding something wrong. We will always do it. We always live up to that, for better or worse. So are we required to? No. Are we likely to? I would say there's something that can be improved in every class, and so I would not be surprised if every observation that you get has some suggestions for improvement.
Isn't it sort of reflective of like deficiency?
You gotta use the microphone or it doesn't work.
Well, I think, and I get the whole idea about English teachers, and we're always sharing expertise. I think sometimes I feel the way that the suggestions are interpreted in the final report as part of the like summary of evaluation are not taken in, as sort of like a nice alternative suggestion, but more like a criticism of like wrongdoing of some kind. And a lot of times, like, I don't know, to me sometimes it feels like it's also part of mentality of kind of, deficit thinking versus asset-based thinking that we're trying to practice and apply to our students. But I also feel that a lot of times that's kind of the approach for observation practice. And, instead of like your colleague highlighting, all the strengths and whatever, and, and then, instead of falling into the, English
Yes.
person thinking that something's always wrong.
I hear the criticism in your question. I'm not unaware of what you are saying or what you mean. I get it. But it is the system that we currently have. Is it the best system? Perhaps not. Is it in fact often honed in on things that are negative and then read as negative? Absolutely, it is. But given all those other things that are happening, right? All the layers of expectations that are filtered down through Senate policy and all those other things, the RTP committee and the observers are working within the constraints of the system that they have. And so I will repeat to you and to everybody, if you leave it only to the observers to speak about your teaching, if you leave it only to SOTs or only to the other materials to speak about you as a teacher and what your goals and assets and intentions are, we will draw whatever conclusions the evidence we have in front of us merit. So take advantage of the opportunity to speak on your own behalf. Otherwise, you have left us with a limited amount of information that we can make decisions based on. I wish I had a better answer. I hear what you're saying about the asset-based versus the deficit-based. A lot of those decisions are carried out far above our ability to change them. So I don't have a solution for you other than take advantage when you have the chance.